What if we just stopped using petroleum? It's in our fuel, our plastics, our fertilizers, hundreds of everyday products. And when it comes from under the ground beneath our feet, it can actually power entire countries. So what would happen if we pulled the plug on this versatile energy source? We at Life Noggin have been digging for answers. You might not have known this about yourself, but you probably get most of your protein from plants or plant-eating animals, thanks to nitrogen fertilizers that are made with natural gas, which is mostly petroleum. But the Haber-Bosch process, which makes these fertilizers, also causes huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, meaning no more petroleum could mean a lot less food for the world, especially in developed countries where farms are more industrialized. But even if we could still eat, we wouldn't be able to travel very far without petroleum. Airplanes and almost all forms of public transit need it to run, and while electric cars are getting more and more popular, there aren't many places where you can charge one right now, especially not in the US, where most charging stations are located in California, and they don't come cheap either. The average cost of home charging is $7,360 before rebates and incentives, and that's if you already have an EV-ready vehicle. If you don't, the upfront costs could be as high as $27,000. So no petroleum means no commuting and no road trips unless you own a classic car that runs on ethanol. Speaking of ethanol, we'd definitely need a lot more of that and other biofuels if we were to stop using petroleum, because it's used to make a whole bunch of things from medicines to paints. You might be surprised to hear that petroleum itself is made from plants and algae that died millions of years ago, and that it takes millions of years to form under intense heat and pressure. So no more petroleum means no more fossil fuels for new plastic production either. Bioplastics made with things like cornstarch can help, but they're currently really expensive, costing around 15 times more than traditional plastics. The world produces around 275 million metric tons of plastic each year, and much of it ends up in landfills, where it doesn't break down well, and often leaks into the environment. Switching to bioplastics would definitely be better for the Earth, but the increased production required to compensate for the lack of traditional plastic could have negative consequences too. One study found that making bioplastics out of cornstarch could cut greenhouse gas emissions by 41%. But another study suggests that making bioplastics out of sugarcane could require so much land that tropical rainforests would be at risk. Then there's the problem of petroleum being an energy source itself. In 2018, the US produced around 13 million barrels of petroleum per day, and while renewable energy resources are growing, they're not quite there yet. If we stopped using petroleum, we'd have to dramatically scale up solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal energy as alternatives. Now all this might sound like it's a real bummer, but stopping using petroleum could actually be a good thing for the planet, because petroleum is a fossil fuel. Burning it releases carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the air, and since it's the main energy source for so many human activities, it's responsible for a quarter of all human-related carbon dioxide emissions. If we stopped using petroleum, we'd slow down climate change and hopefully allow some ecosystems to recover. Of course, it wouldn't just affect the environment. If you're wondering what would happen to the economy, the answer is probably not great. For starters, countries that sell oil to other nations would take a huge hit. Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Canada are among the top exporters of petroleum and petroleum products in the world, and many of them have economies that depend heavily on petroleum exports. According to a 2018 Oxford Economics report, the UK, Netherlands, and Norway would experience the biggest economic contractions due to a loss of petroleum revenue. The UK would lose 17% of its total revenue, and its GDP would shrink by 3.3%. It wouldn't just hurt their economies. There would be ripple effects throughout the world economy. If oil exports disappeared overnight, there would be serious global recession. And that means higher unemployment and less money to go around. Countries with a lot of petroleum in the ground would actually be in a pretty good position. China, Venezuela, and Canada would see the largest increases in GDP, though there's a catch. Even if you're sitting on a gold mine of petroleum, you'll eventually run out. So while countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia have lots of petroleum in the ground, it's not infinite. Eventually, they'll have to start importing it like their neighbors who've already tapped out their reserves. So even though there will be winners and losers when it comes to petroleum, there will eventually be no more winners. So how soon will we run out? That depends on how much we find and how much we use. As of 2018, the world had consumed 5,200 billion barrels of petroleum. But with current consumption rates, we won't run out until sometime between 2050 and 2100. That's assuming we don't find any more reserves, and we don't develop technologies that could extract petroleum from tar sands or other hard-to-reach places. And there's also the question of how much of it is actually useful. There are estimates that suggest that 90% of the petroleum we've discovered isn't actually accessible with current technology. So depending on how quickly we can develop ways to extract it, we may end up with more or less time to adjust. But what happens after we use it all? Well, don't worry, because here at Life Noggin, we've got you covered.